My name is Gen Kelsang Rabten, and on today's podcast we're going to have a fantastic, fascinating discussion at the very intersection of science and spirituality. We're going to explore some of the deepest topics from both worlds and show how we can apply wisdom, insights from these to our daily life to make an enormous difference to our happiness and our well-being. So I'm joined by Kadam Peter Kurczynski. It is lovely to have you here. I've been looking forward to this for some time.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, absolutely. So you are fascinating because you inhabit at the very top level two worlds which many people might find almost diametrically opposed. So you have this rich, deep academic career in science. You're a doctorate, PhD, astrophysicist. You've worked as a research scientist in universities and laboratories. You've taught. You now serve as the chief scientist of NASA's Cosmic Origins program. That is top level stuff. And from a Buddhist point of view, from a meditative world point of view, you trained at Kadampa Meditation Center, Washington, D.C., and later at Kadampa Meditation Center, New York City. You've been the resident teacher at Dharma Chakra Center, 17 years. You've reached the level of Kadam. That's the highest ranked title for a lay teacher in our Buddhist tradition. You're at the top of your game in both of these fields. How does that happen? What's your origin story?
Wow. Well, thank you for that very charitable introduction. I'm not sure I can live up to it, but I appreciate it. My beginnings in Dharma were in a part of my life where, to be honest, I felt like inwardly my life was falling apart. Externally, I was making progress in my educational career goals, but inwardly I felt disconnected. And in retrospect, I was really struggling with issues of meaning and purpose. And I found within Buddhism and meditation just the most extraordinary, wonderful answers to the questions that I was really struggling with.
I mean, it feels like those two threads cohabit actually quite beautifully. Like I said, a lot of people might find the science world and the spirituality world quite opposed, but though the common thread I'm seeing there is your search for purpose and meaning, but also professionally, you're looking for the origins of the universe and light and all of these things. And so there's tremendous sense of where do we come from? Why are we here? What is this about?
Right.
And I think there's something very beautiful in finding those answers on that macro cosmic level from a scientific point of view, but then really going into like the heart, like how do I feel? How do I live?
That's right.
Yeah.
The parallels between modern physics and Buddhism are so exciting and so fascinating to explore. And as an illustration, one of the fascinating aspects about quantum physics is that in quantum physics, particles like photons are indistinguishable. And to get a sense of what that means, take for example, by analogy, two 20-pound notes. They look basically the same, they have the same value, but you can distinguish them by the creases and folds on the bills. However, if you deposit them into your bank account, they become 40 indistinguishable units of currency. And that is the sense in which quantum physics tells us the building blocks of matter and energy are indistinguishable. And what does that mean? It means that they are like abstract ideas. And if that is what is the foundation of reality, it's perplexing and extraordinary and bizarre all at the same time. And yet, from a Buddhist point of view, it rings so true to the teachings that we have on insubstantiality and the lack of independent or inherent existence that one can't kind of overlook the extraordinary parallels and think, wow, perhaps these two great systems of thought and understanding have somehow plugged into a deep fundamental truth about reality. It's amazing.
What I find really exciting is I think a lot of people globally have some inkling. They've been exposed a little bit to this notion of quantum physics and that sort of uncertainty and those, I'm not even going to say the right words, but that sort of potential and the subjectiveness and the observer thing. And what we try to do in Buddhism is not just think that or theorize about that or have these abstract notions of that, but try to find a way to make that a lived experience and live in the basis of that. I mean, can you speak to how you take what might to some seem like quite a wild theory, even though it's obviously backed up with huge amounts of maths and research, but translating that into a meditative experience?
That's a wonderful topic to explore, because I think you're right that even ideas from modern physics and so forth, they may be captivating and intellectually very exciting, but what Buddhism is trying to do is help us to improve our lives, to become better people, to understand our place in the world and live meaningful lives. And this involves much more than just understanding fascinating ideas, but rather taking profound ideas into our heart so that they begin to transform us, to change us as people. And that's what's so beautiful, finally, about Buddha Dharma.
One thing I know about you from our discussions that we've had is that you're a very serious meditator. We had a little conversation the other day about the meditation emptiness, and the precision you were using in describing the way we stage the meditation and how we continue and how we make sure that it's really a meditation on emptiness that's going to have a function, and not just our mind going kind of vague and blank, because a lot of people have a notion of meditation as just sort of sitting not thinking. But what you were describing is very meticulous, crafted logic and clarity leading to an insight that we hold very deeply. Yeah.
That's the wonderful beauty of Geshe-la's presentation of the Dharma, that he gives us the vocabulary and the understanding to actually develop a precise understanding of what meditation is. And especially with the meditation on emptiness, that's so important, because we're dealing with these subtle concepts which are hard to even describe in ordinary language. So this is a beautiful and wonderful, amazing quality of our tradition.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
There's quite a few points that I do want to sort of explore with you. And I do want to spend some time on this point about the intersection of science and spirituality, because I've always felt that Buddha was a scientist of the mind, because the methodology seems to be really evidence-based. It's based not in physical evidence, not in test tubes and Bunsen burners and weights and measures, but there's a way, even in the subjective world of our consciousness and our experience, to find reliable evidence. Is that something that sort of spoke to you at the beginning? Is that something that you would resonate with and agree with?
When I first heard Kadampa teachings, I was absolutely inspired by the teacher, not only for their kind of presentation of Buddhist teachings, but through their personal example of putting the teachings into practice, and also just from the depth and profundity of understanding that he demonstrated. And again, this goes back to Geshe-la's presentation, the books, the tradition that's been handed down to us over the centuries, as a very clear understandings. And so I certainly can appreciate why it comes across as like an inner science.
Yeah. And you said something there about like the way the teacher was behaving. Right. And I remember like early on when I was becoming a teacher myself, that I was given this encouragement or just this thing to try and live by, where a more senior teacher than me said, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I thought that's really perceptive, because of course within the Buddhist tradition there is this enormous wealth of knowledge and experience and scripture and so forth, and we aspire to being completely fluent in all of that intellectually and experientially. But in the end, it does feel like everything boils down to what is in our heart. Who are we for other people? And how can we translate the learning and the knowledge and the insights into something that makes a difference for someone's life?
Yeah. Of all the gifts that Geshe-la has given to us, I think the greatest gift is that he's given us teachers, and he's given us the methodology to train teachers who care about their students, who know how to guide their students along what is otherwise that you can't practice a spiritual path just by downloading an app or reading a book. It is a lived experience that involves your life, and it involves learning from other people, learning from each other.
I do want to talk about these intangibles because, like, obviously, again, the intersection of science and spirituality, there are things that we put a lot of emphasis, like the mind, and in this context, that in-person interaction with a teacher, which we're not getting from a book or an app, is we're not getting the feeling of their mind. Like when we're in a meditation space and there's a teacher who's achieved or is abiding in a certain space of mental energy or presence, and as the students, we don't just hear their words, we don't just get the information, it's like we get a taste, a feeling of what's inside another person's mind. And so I'd be curious to, with the rich, solid scientific background you have, how did you have struggles with believing in the mind-body duality or separation, or past and future lives, or these kind of concepts that some people might say, well, scientists say that's not true, but obviously there are many, many exceptions, and I'm assuming you're one. But was that straightforward, or was that a big journey?
I would say, especially in the early days of my encounter with Kadam Dharma, definitely there was a struggle with faith. And this was something that I wrestled with quite a lot. And what helped me more than anything else was just the experience of a teacher who was able to sort of guide me through my own exploration and discovery. And I really frame my own faith journey as a kind of exploration, an inner exploration, where it's less about blindly adopting a view that you've heard, and it's more about discovering, does this view work for me? Does it change my life? Does it open me up to experiences which I never even knew I could have? And absolutely the answer is yes.
What you've said there really touches on something that for me was crucial in my development. So I remember a time where from the moment I came across Buddha's teachings, I loved them. There was some kind of heartfelt reaction to it, and intellectually I loved it. The answers always felt like, maybe I don't know for sure, but this is certainly plausible, and indeed, to my mind, it felt quite clearly the most likely. But then I kind of felt like I was hitting some sort of glass ceiling where I'm inclined to believe this is probably true, but how do I know if it's true? Like, how do I know if it's really true? And then we've talked a little bit about this relation between the quantum physics and Buddha's teachings on insubstantiality, on the lack of independence, which ultimately we call like emptiness or shunyata, using the Sanskrit word. And it was listening to that teaching where, from a Buddhist point of view, there are no objective realities. There are only subjective realities. And I brought along a little quote which I love. This is from Venerable Geshe Kelsang Rinpoche's book, The New 8 Steps to Happiness, where he's presented this notion that is quite core to Mahayana Buddhism, but initially incredibly foreign to most people. This notion that we've had countless lives and we've had countless mothers, and so we can develop a compassion for everyone, not relating to anyone as a stranger, but realizing we are one big family. It's a beautiful thought, but often when we first encounter it, we think, well, yeah, but is it true though? I mean, like, it's a nice thought, but is it true? And what he says, this was what unlocked something really significant for me. So he said, even though we may find it difficult to prove for ourselves the truth of the view that all living beings are our mothers, we would nevertheless be wise to accept it because there are enormous benefits in doing so. We should understand that ultimately nothing is true except emptiness. Conventional objects such as people, trees, atoms, and planets have a relative degree of reality that distinguishes them from non-existence, such as square circles and unicorns. But only the ultimate nature or emptiness of phenomena is true, because it is only emptiness that exists in the way that it appears. Objects exist only in relation to the minds that cognize them. Since an object's nature and characteristics depend upon the mind that beholds it, We can change the objects we see by changing the way we see them. We can choose to view ourselves, other people, and our world in whatever way is most beneficial. By steadfastly maintaining a positive view, we gradually come to inhabit a positive world, and eventually a pure land. So what this is drawing out, in the first instance for me, it was this moment where the check isn't, is this true, objectively true? Because that's an almost impossible criterion to meet with some of the things we're exploring. You know, on the spiritual path, our mind is engaging with things that initially are so far from our experience, and gradually we make progress and we can validate and verify things. But a test that is relatively straightforward is does this work? Is this beneficial? Does this make me a kinder person, a more peaceful person, a more patient person? And then that criterion then helped me say, okay, well, that's the criterion I need to use. Like I think, you know, like a scientist taking on a hypothesis. Well, okay, this will be my working hypothesis. Everyone is my mother. What happens when I take that? Did you have a similar sort of feeling about using emptiness to make these, almost like find faith through emptiness?
I love that way of thinking that you described and read from a Venerable Geshe-la's book. It helps us to have a more flexible view, and in some ways I find it helpful to think of Buddhism as well as any other religion as like a language. And this is what is so helpful in this whole debate between science and religion. If you think of religion like Buddhism and a set of beliefs as like a language, then the question is not so much, is this language true or not? It's what can you express? Mm-hmm. What thoughts can you express? How can you express what's in your heart using this language? And then all of a sudden you can just let go of a lot of the weedy nonsense about, oh, is this true or not true? And just concentrate on discovering what's in your heart. And what we find from Buddhism is that there are states of mind, experiences, which we simply have never imagined we were capable of. And Buddhism can describe them, it can explain how to develop them, it can guide us step by step to the most extraordinary, beautiful states of being. How could you ever turn that down? And why would you waste your time wondering about, oh, is this real or is that real? When even Buddhism is just saying, this is just conventional truth. Use it for what its intended purpose is. Use it to grow and develop and improve and explore what your mind and your heart are capable of. How amazing.
I love that. It's a system. Does the system work? Mm. Does the system take me where I want to go? And then so many layers of worry and anxiety about this, that, and the other disappears with that flexible, light approach. Yeah.
It also allows us to interact in the world where we're inevitably going to meet people of other spiritual traditions, people of no spiritual tradition, and instead of getting hung up on, this is my truth, we can have a little flexible mind and focus on connecting with each other and opening our heart and learning from each other.
And that language analogy is beautiful, because you can meet someone with a different language and realize these are my words, those are your words. But we're talking about something where there's a shared experience that we can enjoy there.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
And another thing I love about that passage I read out is it's very practical. Like, it's practical in the sense of helping us shift our focus from the sort of cerebral blockages that we might have to a lived experience. But it's also talking about how we change the world. And gradually over time, things that are described that initially you might think, well, is that really, can I change my world just by changing my mind? But then quite quickly, our world is different. With a different mind, it's a different world. You know, even on a very small level, we can be angry, say, with a colleague or a family member or partner or whoever. And then if we think this is the inner poison of anger, I am doing this to myself. And then maybe we do a meditation, we think about their good qualities, we remember their kindness, we think about what they're going through, all of our feelings shift. And suddenly that person that seemed so, even physically ugly, now appears beautiful and attractive, and their energy is something that we cherish. And we have literally changed our world.
It's spectacular. And this is part of our everyday experience. It's not something that needs to be, abstract, or only these special individuals experience this. This is something that all of us have access to.
And something I know about you're an astrophysicist. By that's your main focus. Now, I know you have a significant background in engineering and advanced technologies. And again, stressing I know so little about that world, but what I understand about engineering is it's the practical science. It's the one that's about getting things done and making things work. And what I love is the correlation here, because spiritually, Kadampa Buddhism, that's about bringing all of Buddha's teachings into play in our daily life. It's the getting it done, Yeah.
That's a wonderful way to put it. Yes, yeah. We're trying to take very profound ideas and put them into practice, and it's the practice that matters. It's the day-to-day, trying to be a kind person, trying to let go of your delusions and struggles, and be there for others and be a better person for the world.
Yeah. And I'm imagining that engineering mindset, because I know in the way my mind works, like I might be in a situation and I notice something's coming up in my mind, some sort of, an unhealthy response to a situation or a person. And then it's like, from one point of view, it's an inner engineering challenge. Okay, we have this coming up. How can we engineer a better response? Obviously we're not trying to just dam that down and suppress that. We want to have like an emotional, I would say, engaged response with everyone in every situation, but the healthiest and most positive possible. And so I think sometimes approaching our mind almost like as a project. I've got to figure out how this thing works and find the best way, the most effective, most efficient way of it working. Yeah.
Having a daily project is something that my own teacher has said over the years, absolutely, and it's something that I've tried to transmit to students, absolutely, because we need to be working on something on a day-to-day basis, or else it's easy for our practice to sort of slip off and our mind to get dark pretty quickly.
I do want to touch on some of the big things. So professionally, cosmic origins. Origin is a word that comes up a lot in Buddhism. The most famous Buddhist teaching is the Four Noble Truths: true sufferings, true origins, true cessations, true paths, which is this beautiful dialectic for all problem solving. But at the heart of it is, where do things come from? And we can talk about true origins and suffering and delusions, but I wanted to go to, where does consciousness come from? Like a big part of your research and your work is the universe, the forming of the universe and galaxies and all of these things. And there's another passage I'd like to read, again, quite a lengthy passage, but I do really enjoy this. This is Venerable Geshe's book, Joyful Path of Good Fortune. And he's talking about, again, the continuum of the mind and so forth. He says, we can correctly infer that we have taken countless rebirths because the continuum of our mind is beginningless and our body is impermanent. For example, a barley seed comes from a crop that in turn grew from a seed. If we trace it back, we can never find the beginning of the continuum of the barley seed. Even before this planet developed, the continuum of the barley seed existed in some other universe. Similarly, the mind of today arises from the mind of yesterday, and the continuum of the mind has no beginning. The mind we have right now does not arise independently, without causes and conditions. The mind of a newborn baby arises from the mind of the baby in its mother's womb, and the mind of the baby in its mother's womb arises from the mind that entered the fertilized ovum at conception. Where did that mind come from? It came from the mind that existed before conception, the mind of the previous life. This mind itself came from the mind of the previous life, and so on, without beginning. So for some people, perhaps listening, who aren't familiar with these kind of concepts or ideas, it can sound like, oh, that's just an assertion. But in Buddhism, like Buddha said, don't believe what I say just because people call me Buddha. Test it as you would to say gold. If someone was trying to sell us gold, we would check that it really is. And so what this is based on is a really simple analogy. I believe it's from Dharmakirti's commentary to Valid Cognition, where he talked about a knife with a metal blade and a wooden handle. Two distinct sources. So he says, you cannot get the steel blade from a tree. You cannot get the wooden handle from metal ore. Everything comes from its own continuum. And with respect to the body and the mind, even, and I believe this is sort of the consensus or most common scientific view. There are some scientists who are kind of reductionists who believe we're just a fleshy machine. But my understanding is a lot of scientists will talk about the mind as like an epiphenomenon. Like it exists, but it's held to be a product of the functioning of the brain. Like there is a mind, consciousness is its own thing, but it only exists because of the brain. Whereas going to that analogy from Dharmakirti, if we look at those two things, physical processes, mental processes, physical things can be photographed, they can be weighed, they're obstructed by contact, they can move only linearly in time, whereas mental phenomena, you can't photograph a mind. Like you can do a brain scan, but you can't take a photograph of an actual mental state, a mental experience, consciousness. It doesn't weigh anything. It's not obstructed by time. We can think of the past, the future, experiencing those things. And so what we would say is the consciousness and the physicality are two different continuums. And so given two different continuums, they must go back, beginning, caused by their own previous continuum. This is one of the main things for Buddhists to gain conviction in past and future lives. Taking this, please talk to those points, but also taking this to literally what Venerable Geshe just said there, some other universe. Is the consensus opinion about the Big Bang that it's one of many, or are we saying this is an absolute beginning?
With regard to the astrophysical understanding of the universe, we are currently abiding in an epoch that is about 13.8 billion years after the Big Bang. And as telescopes look out into space, they are also looking backward in time, because light takes so long to reach us that a distant galaxy that you can image with a James Webb Space Telescope, for example, may have existed at a time when the universe was less than 1 billion years old. And so you literally can look back and see the universe unfolding as you look deeper and deeper into the sky. And as we think back all the way to the Big Bang, it sort of challenges our very notion of time, because what does it mean to say that there was a first moment in time? It sort of challenges your very notion of time, because it fundamentally doesn't make sense. Time itself began with the Big Bang. And what this illustrates to me is that we have grown up with everyday concepts of time and space and experience, but those understandings are derived from a very narrow set of parameters of time and space. And if you go beyond those, our ordinary intuition breaks down. Our very concepts of time and space fundamentally don't make sense and have to be replaced with more abstract notions like quantum physics and relativity theory and so forth. And in some respects, those are beyond our everyday sense awareness. It's showing how we live in a very tiny sliver of the vastness of reality. And some of it is pretty hard to even fathom. And we need this is why we need methods of analysis, and this is where science has been so successful in extrapolating beyond the realm of our everyday experience. Now, within Buddhism, and you mentioned past and future lives and so forth, this is also an extrapolation beyond our normal experience of everyday life. And for me personally, I find the most beneficial way for me to do that personal extrapolation is, in a sense, by looking within my own heart and my own feelings and my own responses to things that happen in the world, as a way of kind of deducing, what's in there in the deep recesses of my own mind. As an example, it's probably an everyday experience for all of us. If somebody cuts you off in traffic, you get really angry. And that anger just arises spontaneously in a moment without our even having a chance to think consciously about it. And maybe in the extreme, those angry thoughts are conjoined with, plotting and actions that we'd like to take and so forth. And if you ask yourself, where does all that come from? Why is it that I have those thoughts? It becomes a very interesting investigation. And if we can now bring into that investigation the language of Buddhism, the language of other realms, the language of past and future lives, all of a sudden it suggests a way of understanding our experience, which, absent that language, we really have no way to understand it. And the implications of that are very specific things that we can do to kind of improve our mind and how we understand. And once again, this is where Buddhism becomes not just true, it becomes useful, it becomes practical. So if I can use insights that come from a belief in past and future lives to help me respond more peacefully in this moment and to help others to do the same, then, well, that's a very tangible outcome that's independent of the particulars of whether or not that construct is quote-unquote true. And interestingly enough, mathematicians do exactly the same thing. There is a field of mathematics called complex analysis, for example. And in the calculus of complex analysis, one learns to solve mathematical problems involving real numbers, but the problems with these real number calculations can't be solved unless you posit additional kinds of numbers called imaginary numbers. And when those imaginary numbers were first conceived, they were called imaginary because nobody thought that they really existed. People thought real numbers like 1, 2, 3, those exist, but these imaginary numbers, not really. Well, it turns out that there are problems in the real world that you can't solve unless you invoke the imaginary numbers. And if you invoke the imaginary numbers, suddenly the real problems become easy to solve. And that's a whole branch of mathematics. And it illustrates in a very sort of scientific way how we can approach our spiritual lives in a more practical way.
I love that. I love that. And that's certainly my experience and my experience as a teacher. There's moments where I see students at meditation classes having these momentous spiritual breakthroughs, because there's a stage where our practice is geared primarily towards having more comfortable feelings, less uncomfortable feelings. And that's fantastic. Buddha gave many different methods, but there's a sort of cap to it. Like, I can become more peaceful, but only to a degree. And then there's a stage where, with the help of these kind of concepts, and again, without having to grasp at them tightly, there's like a breakthrough where our practice isn't so much about the now in the sense of how am I feeling, how am I reacting, how are people treating me, but the mind just becomes incredibly expansive beyond even this life or anything, and then suddenly that sort of glass ceiling of what we can achieve with our meditation just shatters, and the mind becomes boundless. Yeah.
Western psychology it seems to me, is still catching up to the states of mind and experiences that have been talked about and written about and passed down for generations within Buddhism. And it's going to be exciting to see what happens in the decades ahead. Currently, there is research going on in neuroscience and cognitive psychology that is trying to understand the experiences that meditators have developed. But in the general popular culture, and I think even in the psychology academic community, there's really no even inkling of understanding of some of the experiences that we learn about in Buddhism. For example, a state of perfect concentration, or a state of unconditional love, or a state of realization of anything, let alone emptiness of inherent existence. These are absolutely phenomenal experiences which have been described in detail, and the methods for developing them have been given to us, in which we can learn to practice them. And there are people all over the world trying their best to go in that direction, in which modern science has absolutely no clue. So we are, in a very real sense, on the frontier of an extraordinary discovery.
I love that. And that experience that we have, that's actually in our world, in the meditation world, in that side of your life and that side of your world, is so common, where we've had a moment, like, just with respect to anger, we can be in a situation and maybe a Buddhist teacher or whoever tells us, you don't have to be angry. And we can't even imagine not being angry. Like, did you not see what they did? Of course I'm angry. How could I not be? Everybody would be angry. But then we start to notice, well, hang on a minute. I see them in those situations and they're not getting angry. And a little door opens, and then we find those pathways, like a little bit like I was describing earlier. Like, we think, well, what is the experience from the other person's point of view? What are they going through? Really, they're showing me their suffering. This isn't even about me. This person is letting me see some of the pain in their life. Why would I want to add to that? All those kind of punitive, vengeful thoughts, they just don't make any sense. And then finally, we've arrived at this point where it doesn't make any sense to get angry. Like, that's the last thing I would do. This person is showing me their pain. Why would I want to hurt them more? The only thing that makes sense is, can I help? And that's this journey which is so common, in the meditation world, where impossible, can't be true, it's just not achievable in my heart, to even within a matter of months or certainly years, like, we've arrived at somewhere where that's the only thing that makes sense. Like, the freedom from that anger, to be angry, like, why would I be angry? It doesn't make any sense. Like, sometimes I use this analogy of, if I was walking in the street and someone punched me in the face, and I turn and say, well, who hits a monk? Like, what is wrong with this person? And then I realize maybe it's an epileptic having a seizure and they've been spasming or something. And at that point, what do? I'm not going to kick them. I'm not going to say, how dare you hit me? I'm going to give you a good kicking for that. The only thing that makes sense is to help. And if we put our mind in that kind of a model, then, yeah, someone is showing me their pain, they're lashing out in some way, they're suffering. The last thing I want to do is add to that. The only thing that makes sense is to see if I can help. And maybe we have to have strong boundaries, and maybe we have to be very assertive, and all of that may be entirely appropriate. But in our heart, we can have peace. Yeah.
What a beautiful vision. It seems to me that whenever we first come to a class in meditation and Buddhism, we hear about the kind of approaches that you're describing, and hopefully we try to start in our own small ways to put methods of practicing patience into use in our life. And I think for each of us, there are moments where it's like the impossible suddenly becomes possible. Like I didn't imagine it would be possible for me to like this person, and then suddenly a little bit of a change happens, and our world is different. We maybe try to be a little bit kind to them, and they reciprocate a little bit, and all of a sudden we realize that actually my world can change tremendously.
I love that, and I love the fact that my experience, and I imagine you share the same experience, is that with the practice of meditation, with applying the Buddhist teachings, there is this exponential growth of that ability to change. Like, there is change we make with even just breathing meditation. We change our feeling about who we are, because we're finding a peace at our center, like the center of our being. We realize the story we've told ourselves, I'm stressed, that's not the truth. That's just the noise on the surface. Go a little deeper and there's this beautiful, peaceful person. And then we start practicing the meditation on love and forgiveness and these kind of things. And then when we start getting into emptiness and we realize I can fast track the changes by choosing to not believe the way things are appearing, but to manifest, to project mentally the kind of reality that's going to be helpful for myself, for others, for everyone involved. I'm I've been a teacher for some time. I'm given many opportunities. Sometimes there's a part of my mind that's a bit self-limiting, and so are you really up to that? Should you really be doing that? What if you make a mess of this? And where I got into, which I feel is a practical application of the teaching on emptiness, is like, if this is a dream, like if this is my dream, if it's some deep way, some deep part of my consciousness is writing this story, why don't I just start choosing the story I want to write? Why don't I just write the end of this chapter, the end of this story, that's exactly what I want it to be? It doesn't have to be, oh, I can't do it and I failed. Like, no, let's just imagine I get enlightened. Let's imagine I help everyone else get it. Let's imagine those kind of things. And then the peace and the joy that comes with that, bringing the freedom of emptiness into the way I relate to challenges and opportunities. Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Mm.
So one thing I have been wanting to ask about is cosmology. Like in the presentation that we have in the Kadampa Buddhist tradition, we don't go into a great deal. There is some elements of the way a Buddhist sees reality, and there's Mount Meru and continents and so forth, and we do talk about different realms. Mm-hmm. How broad is, from a science point of view, a sense of reality like that, in sense of dimensions, realms, universes, parallels? Like, is there a way that there's some sort of connection with the way Buddha's presenting things? Because that's, a pure mind sees the universe this way, a less pure mind sees it. Is there any kind of correspondence or data?
One thing that I always remember is when I was a postdoc, I used to see images that were taken by the astronomical team that I was part of, in which they would, using a big observatory, take a picture of a tiny little patch of sky, and then they would blow that up into a sort of a wall-sized poster. And when you look at that poster, every tiny square centimeter was dotted with points of light. And each point of light was not a star, but a galaxy of 100 billion or more stars. So the modern understanding of the universe is unbelievably immense. In our galaxy alone, there are of order 100 billion stars. And what we've discovered in the past few years is that on the order of every star has at least a planet or two or more. So that suggests that within our galaxy alone, there are hundreds of billions of planets. And although we don't know this, we can easily guess that there may be, millions upon millions of planets that are roughly like the Earth in terms of potentially being places where life could evolve. And so from a scientific point of view, the universe is really vast, and we are just entering into an understanding of it. So it's very exciting.
And another thing I was thinking about is, in the scientific methodology, where you sort of create a hypothesis and you test it, and then finally you kind of get more data to support it, and eventually there's a consensus opinion and it continues to be validated. Is there something, having had that background, which gives you a freedom in your meditation to, let me try this thought, let me try that thought, let me just be a little bit less concerned about knowing already, is it the truth, or is it right, is it going to work? But having the freedom to, let's just play with this, let's just see where this takes me.
Right. That's much more at the heart of the scientific process than I think many people who are outside of science realize. One of my favorite quotes from Einstein, and I hope this is an actual quote because it's a beautiful one, it says, if we knew what it was we were doing, it would not be called research. And that really captures the spirit of scientific investigation. When you're going into something new that you don't understand, you're like a child, and you're going to make mistakes, and you're going to spend a long time working on a problem that turns out to be not the right problem, or solving it in a way that's way too complicated and could be done much more simply by someone who has greater knowledge and so forth. But this is the frontier, and it's difficult, and it demands a creative passion and exploration and a willingness to be wrong. Oftentimes scientists are portrayed in the popular culture as people who are always having the knowledge and are always right and so forth. But the actual practice of doing science is continually making mistakes and continually coming up against your own ignorance time and time and time again until gradually or with some luck you've hit on a deep truth or something like that.
And I'm loving the joy as you're saying that. There's a clear joy about that. That almost like there's a playfulness, a curiosity, and an exploration that I resonate really deeply with in my practice. Like I'm trying things and I'm trial and error and I'm trying to figure out how my mind works, but I'm not taking it too seriously. Like it's meaningful, it's purposeful. There are, certainly from a Buddhist point, there are great stakes, but I think it works best. Like Venerable Geshe used to say this often, like a child at play. Keep that sort of just that playfulness, that lightness, enjoy it. The failures we don't need to take so seriously. We can celebrate learning because we can learn from like I'm sure again in the science world as in the meditation world, things go wrong. We probably learn just as much from things going wrong as we might from things going right. In fact, things going right sometimes gives us the wrong data because we think, oh, this has proved my hypothesis, but it's actually not done that. Whereas disproving something, oh, now I've definitely learned something.
That's right. Scientists are delighted when a theory gets disproven or a great established truth is called into question. That, for scientists, is where the fun begins.
And one of the things that I most enjoyed at the beginning, because my background is a little bit more philosophy and the study of religion, and with philosophy, being trained to question how I think, or even just to know how I'm thinking, to expose the unexamined assumptions in my mind. And that's been so valuable in terms of my own practice and in terms of my ability as a teacher, because if I'm trying to share something deep and something that's beyond the immediate experience, then to get from wherever we might be in our worldview and our sense of how things are, we need to know what I've already accepted and then check, have I accepted some things into my mind that aren't actually the truth? And sort of reassess what's already there. Like there's this sort of saying or analogy or homily or whatever about a cup that's already full. You can't pour more into it. And so we need to see what's already in my mind. What are my unexamined assumptions? And start taking those out. And then suddenly there's space to reconsider how am I viewing things.
Those are often the source of the best questions and the best discussions in science are when you are able to expose the underlying assumptions in a theory or a presentation or something like that. And it's hard to do that because it demands a certain amount of courage, and it demands a certain amount of that beginner's mind of not being afraid to ask what might be interpreted as a dumb question because it's a foundational question. I often find that those are actually the most important questions.
And we've touched on the meditation emptiness, on the meditation on the true nature of reality a number of times. And in that meditation, the core part of it is this very first step we call ascertaining the object of negation, which is about really becoming aware of how do I believe I exist? How am I conceiving my reality? And before we hear those kind of teachings, we don't even question. We've bought in a hook, line, and sinker, and we're just living without even questioning that maybe I am projecting. Maybe my mind is involved in my reality. So there's a really beautiful moment of self-awareness where we start to realize, from one point it's who do I think I am, but it's who do I think I am on a really deep level.
That's a great point. It's almost like the entire meditation on emptiness of self is helping us to recognize the most deeply held, unexamined assumption about our life, and that is that the self exists as an independent entity. And once you begin to question that assumption, the answer is sort of immediate, but it's asking the question, which is so hard to do.
And that notion of the self not being independent is then showing us that the self is a dependent arising. And these might sound like technical terms, but the joy in understanding the self as a dependent arising is causes and conditions have assembled to produce this appearance of who I am. So most of us have a very strong sense of who we are, very often colored by a sense of limitation. I have this fault, I have this history, I have these scars, I have these flaws, I can't do that, I'm not able. We often have those very strong views, but that self is a dependent arise. They're not real. They're not inevitable. That self is a product of causes and conditions. Start to change the causes and conditions. Start to change what we're bringing into that self, and an entirely different self, an almost unrelated self will start to appear. You know, because we can go from being whatever we are at the beginning to you know, from a Buddhist point of view, an enlightened self can arise, a self that is like a radiant sun, bringing happiness and peace into the lives of everyone everywhere. That self is possible. That's also just a dependent arising. It's all about just gathering the causes and conditions.
That's inspiring. Wonderful. Thank you. I'm gonna hold on to that one.
Fantastic. So we started with your wish for purpose and meaning.
Yeah.
And this has been a life of like many explorations and discoveries in science, many, I would say, even richer discoveries inside in your meditation. How are you feeling now?
Well, life is full of ups and downs, and I think we should be realistic as practitioners. We're going to have some good experiences. We're going to have some difficult experiences. But looking back on the past, unbelievably 30 years of practicing meditation, I can absolutely say that the Dharma gives us a wonderful vision for our potential, and it gives us a lot of practical advice for smoothing out the rough spots, for filling in some of the deeper chasms that our mind may have a tendency to fall into, and for allowing us to enjoy the good things and bring others into our enjoyment. And it's been a wonderful journey. It's changed my life so much, and I'm so grateful to all of my teachers and to Sangha members like yourself and the community that we have that's making this possible for everyone.
Thank you. This has been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed this. I hope you've had a good time.
Me too,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Cool. Great, fantastic.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.